Welcome, everybody, to Rad Turtle Wrestling Podcast, a hard-hitting, in-depth, cutting-edge look at today's product in the world of professional wrestling. Now, without further ado, here are your hosts, Rob Francois and Jeff Johnson. Hey guys, welcome back to the Rad Turtles Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Francois. We're in day 3 of Rad Mania. 7 days of coverage for you guys, the week of WrestleMania. This is episode 28. And we got a great one for you. You guys will know who he is. He's a big wrestling fan. He is the voice of the Boston Celtics. He's done Bellator. He's done the Frozen Four. I mean, this guy's pretty much done it all. And like I said, he's a really big wrestling fan. None other than our special guest, Sean Grande. How you doing tonight, Sean?
I'm doing well. Whenever you read the resume, I think this time of year I've never done a WrestleMania. That's about it. That's like the only thing left, right?
We got to get you on that. We really do.
Jim Ross, his buddy of mine, as people on Twitter know, used to always talk about that. Oh, he'd be great. And I never really thought my particular style, which has lent itself to all the other sports, right. I never felt I could be over the top enough. I always told him that the moment I knew I had it always came up that, Dave Lagana's a buddy of mine who's done all that NWA stuff. And I always realized I could probably do, if I were 50 years older, I could have done like Dory Funk and Jack Briscoe, right? Yeah, when it was treated a little bit differently, it was more sporting event. But I always told JR, because he was there the night that, this is way back old school Attitude Era, for all you kids with your fancy Skype and your fancy video. The night that Road Warrior Hawk fell off the back of the Titantron. Yeah. And then Sable walks out and Jerry Lawler said, well, you can't grieve forever. That's when I pretty much knew we had gone to a different, I'm like, okay, this is a completely different thing than the pseudo sport. Right. I grew up with, as a kid in New York.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, you're pretty animated in your Celtics broadcast. I think you could channel your inner, JR, or your inner Mauro Ranallo, and I think you could pull it out. You're a seasoned pro. I have no doubts if you really tried, you could do it.
It's come up once or twice. There have been these little events. I've been asked about it. I don't know at this point. I've done all these things that you're listing, and obviously so many more that I always thought maybe it would be fun to do it once, because I have a lifelong love for the business, but what I do for a living, I never really felt, again, translated. But there's a way to, I never in my wildest imaginations thought I'd be doing MMA when that came up, and that just became a challenge. It's about whatever sport you're doing, whatever it is you're doing, it's about immersing yourself so completely in it that it's the only thing that matters, and, making it entertaining for who's ever watching.
Now, I mean, to say the least, you're an amazing radio announcer. I've always thought, listening to you and Max on the Celtics games, you guys are fantastic. And because you're a pro on the radio, you have to tell a story, because obviously people can't watch it. So I think that would lend a little bit to your ability to tell a story about what's going on in the ring. I know it's a different, like you said, it's a different style of broadcasting now. I know there's so many things to plug and all that, and I don't know how Michael Cole even keeps up with it. But your ability to tell a story, I think would lend credibility to you being a pretty good wrestling announcer.
I'll tell you this: I grew up watching. Who I always felt was one of the most underrated wrestling announcers in history for just that reason was a guy named Vince McMahon, because he was so good at that. He's the guy I grew up, watching when I was a little kid. Again in New York, watching him call the, and it's as interesting as it is. And he's got a football league he's launching next year. And I've always had this sort of, always be a cool bucket list thing to work for him one day. Yeah. I can also tell you, having spoken to pretty much every announcer who's worked there in the last 20 years, I can assure you, I don't think I would do too well with somebody in my ear overproducing me every second. I'm not sure that. I don't know how Michael Cole. Again. Yeah. But, Michael's had such an amazing career. So he had an impossible act to follow. And he went to a different place when he had that run. You would know better than me, 2011 maybe, when he did sort of the heel run. Yep. And I remember I was in Miami the night he and Rock opened the show, because the Celtics were in the playoffs. Right. And he and Rock opened the show with a confrontation, and Michael had the Celtics jersey on to draw heat in Miami. Yeah. And he stood, when I say he stood toe-to-toe with Rock, I mean literally in the segment. Like, he carried the segment with him. There was no drop-off whatsoever. Right. So, I've always been a fan. I appreciate guys that had sort of impossible acts to follow.
And he's fantastic, and he's super underrated, for everything that he has to do. Plugging all the social media stuff. It's not really about calling the moves anymore. It's just about getting what they need to get over. And a lot of people give him crap, because of who he is and because he had to follow Jr. But you're right, man. He's fantastic for what he does, and he earned that role for sure.
We're in a hypercritical age. I mean,
Right.
I've said for many years, people are going to chant Cena sucks at his Hall of Fame induction. That's going to be that's their beach ball.
Yeah, right.
That's the beach ball going around the crowd. It's audience participation. They'll chant it, and they'll chant it out of love at his induction, because that's the age. Anyone who's I'm the lowest level public figure there is, and yet my life can be. You can let social media affect you if you choose to.
Right.
It's just it's the next level of what I always call the "How's my driving" theory, which is nobody in the history of the "How's my driving" bumper sticker ever picked up the phone and called in and said, "Hey, I just want to tell you, I saw your guy back out of a loading dock into 2 lanes of traffic and pull out perfectly with that. It was awesome, and I really wanted to call and tell you that." That's never happened in the history of How's My Driving, and it won't. That's the nature of it.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very good point. And I actually I'm a dispatcher in the transportation industry, so I have not received any calls, good or bad or indifferent. So you're absolutely right about that one. So let's backtrack a little bit and get into your history being a wrestling fan. What's your earliest memory of watching wrestling on TV?
I love that question. I always ask it. I'm always fascinated by the entry point, because those of us that were fans, and my fandom has ebbed and flowed based on my life. You have a full-time job and you're traveling around the country, then you're doing MMA and traveling around the world, and you've got a son. My son's now 7.5, and that has been pretty much my whole time. But it's always there. It's always in you. And I love that entry point thing, because something hooked you in. And when I was, I think, 8 years old, very close to my son's age now, he's a little younger than I was. I remember turning to my dad, and this is old, just give away my age, but obviously it's almost coming up on 40 years now. But I turned to my dad and I said, "Why does this Larry Zbyszko guy want to fight the announcer?" Like, well, I don't understand.
You thought Bruno
Bruno was the announcer to me. I didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
And that hooked me in. And my first show, the first one I went to at Madison Square Garden, it's funny, I guess I realized now that I've realized it's a Skype thing, I could have just held up the program because it's sitting up in my office. Yeah. But my first show was the first Bruno Zbyszko match at Madison Square Garden.
Wow.
Let's summarize. I guess I was 8 or whatever. And at that night, I became just implicitly and unwittingly so nervous when Bob Backlund defended the title. I just became this huge 8-year-old Bob Backlund fan, to the point like that. My childhood was the Mets, the Rangers, the Jets, and Bob Backlund. That was basically my New York childhood. And to this day, sadly, I haven't done it many, many years, but I still think I could do it. I can run off the top of my head all 60 whatever title defenses Backlund had at Madison Square Garden.
Wow. Which
I always called, it's a party trick for what I only imagine would be the worst party ever thrown by anybody.
I love it. And you do have a fantastic memory when it comes to wrestling. So much so that when we first started talking on Twitter, it's been a while now, maybe 6-7 years ago, we actually had some trivia contests back and forth. So, and I was never able to stump you, to your credit. So,
But you know what? Everybody has an age. I mean, I do have a kind of a sick memory, which is funny because it's not that you're out to pasture or you're outdated, but the internet institutional memory in my job is very significant. But it's probably not as significant as it used to be, because now you can find things at the click of a couple of clicks of a button that I might have remembered. Oh yeah, that game in Phoenix in 2004. I remember that game because Ricky Davis did this, blah blah blah. Now you can sort of find that stuff online, but I've always had that strange memory. But again, your age is determining. There are long patches of WWE history or pro wrestling history where you're kind of fuzzy because you're not hardcore because your life is happening. When you're like, I think a lifelong fan, there are people that have watched every week their entire lives for 40 years or 50 years. But I think there are probably more of us who kind of come in and out based on not love of the business or disinterest, but real life.
Yeah, you're right about that. And I remember more as a kid and as a teenager than I do now, as far
Sure.
as because there's so many events and all that now. But it had such an impact on me when I was younger. For whatever reason, it just stuck in there. Like I could tell you the first, maybe 14 WrestleManias. Every match on the card and every outcome and all that. Shit, I couldn't even tell you what happened last year. You know what I mean? Like
That happens with whatever your childhood team is. You can recite those games or whatever. Then there's that time when you're going off to college and you're trying to meet girls and do things
Yeah.
that take up your all of a sudden it's not as cool to like I got to say that Bob Backlund thing has never helped me with women ever. Never once. It's never been hey, did you know that after the Ken Patera at Texas Death Match she wrestled that it's not going to work. You gotta
right.
find a new game.
Well, you score points with me if that means anything at all. So.
Well, it's just that I generally have the job in which, as I've often pointed out over the years, I have a job in which I tend to be idolized by young, stay-at-home men as opposed, women rarely say, "Oh, that call you had was, oh my God, that was the sexiest thing I ever heard." I absolutely
right.
They're rarely sending me pictures and things like that because I love the way you read that commercial and segued back into it. I get it.
Even being a radio announcer, man.
You'd think,
you
right?
get all the chicks, right? Yeah.
No, the only move I ever had really was I suppose I can reveal it now. The only move I ever had with my job is the girls like, hey, text me a word and I'll work it in. While you're. That's really that's all you had. I remember in the old days, not the old days. Yeah, it was the old days.
Yeah.
The first, obviously, I came in as a TV guy in the league for a few years, so you're always courtside there. And then the first 5 or 6 years I was in Boston, most of the locations were courtside in the NBA. And as time has gone by, they passed a rule in 2006 that they could put you wherever they want in the arena to sell those courtside seats. So in the old days, when you're courtside, then you can always kind of like, wave at the camera or put up a little, like a little something for anybody that may be watching it you're trying to impress. But now, we kind of lost that too.
Well, at least it worked once because we know you have a kid. So at least one time.
I've got it's funny. I have an NBA life. I've got,
I
have an ex-wife. I have a son with a woman I was not married to, and I have a fiance. So that's pretty much a full NBA.
That's a trifecta.
That's an NBA life right there.
Yeah, it is. What's your favorite WrestleMania? If you could put, would it be something newer, something older?
It's interesting with the gaps. I think you tend to romanticize. I remember, the closed circuit of the first couple. I remember being in New York for it. There was a house show before the first one. I was at the show when they did the angle around Christmas time, setting up the first WrestleMania with Cyndi Lauper and Lou Albano, Roddy Piper, and the Gold Record. I remember being there for that. Yeah. So you sort of romanticize about that. Eventually I went off to college. I remember we were still in the closed circuit age, before the pay-per-view age. Yep. And then, it's hard to, you have your childhood. If you're me, you got the childhood era, you got the attitude era, and then you have now, and the evolution of the in-ring. How on earth do you compare the in-ring product that I grew up with, with what there is now? We're seeing things we've never seen, but
it's hard.
You gain stuff and you lose stuff.
Yeah,
I think I would say I wasn't even a hardcore fan at the time, but certainly the 10th one with the ladder match and the 2 Bret Hart matches, just from putting everything together. That's almost the first modern WrestleMania of the forward-thinking booking, like thinking about what's going to come out of it, and not just the event in and of itself, but as a continuing, spinning wheel going forward.
Yeah, to me, and we're similar in age. I'll be 43 this year, so we're right around almost the same generation. So I started wrestling probably right around the time you did, maybe a little bit later. My first actual memory before I even got into it was when Hulk Hogan had defeated the Iron Sheik for the title, and I remember him celebrating backstage with Mean Gene and Andre and pouring champagne all over Hulk and all that. That's my first actual memory as a kid turning on the TV, but I really didn't get hardcore into it until about '88. And I think the whole Mega Power build up for that year was fantastic. That's just something that you don't even see anymore. But I mean, they had the whole year planned out and ahead of time, and just going back and watching everything that happened, and just look at the little nuances, the little looks on Randy's face, like when Hogan picked up Elizabeth and put her on his shoulder at Survivor Series '88. Just seeing the look on Macho Man's face, like they already had that planned out well in advance, and it's not things that you don't notice until later on once you go back and watch it again. Like, oh wow, Yeah, I totally see the seed was planted right there. Maybe even at SummerSlam '88 when she took her skirt off and had that bathing suit on or whatever, and like, that was
Funny you,
Hogan. That was
funny
Hogan's
you bring
idea.
that one
So
up. It's
yeah,
funny you bring it up, and as you can see, I'm peeking down and scrolling. There's no way I'm going to be able to find it. Um, I'm in that. I'm all over that video, that home video, because I'm along the barrier. I'm a high schooler along the
really?
barrier in
Mm-hmm.
SummerSlam '88. And there's pictures of when Andre, there's a picture that made it around the internet where you see Andre coming out, and there's
Yeah.
me, looking up at him, but I
Yeah.
forget. And the hat, it's funny, the hat I was wearing that night is part of my childhood rebellion against if the WWF of my childhood was my parent, my teenage rebellion against it was I was the anti Hulk Hogan because I was the Bob Backlund era. So I hated the cartoon stuff and the Hulk Hogan stuff.
Yeah.
I have a National Wrestling Alliance hat.
Awesome.
So that was the extent of my teenage rebellion there in the front row. Ultimate Warrior comes flying by me to beat Honky Tonk Man and but who knew? Years later, I'm like that picture would make the I guess it's 30 years now. Gosh.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a pretty awesome event to go to. That was a really, really good show.
Yeah, it was a good show. It was the Madison Square Garden shows where you don't realize how spoiled you are. I grew up a mile or two from MSG, and that was everything back then. Those monthly shows were that was where everything happened. It was I didn't think. I assumed you were supposed to draw 20,000,
Right,
and that was what it was. You didn't realize they were doing the same matches in the other cities later on, and the Intercontinental title I saw when I was a kid, back when it used to change twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
I was at all those title changes. I was there when Ken Patera won it, and Pedro and Morocco, and I remember being at all these Intercontinental title changes, which is a big deal just because you happen to be, in New York.
That's so cool. I grew up outside of Hartford, in Windsor, Connecticut, so I was kind of on that. Not the New York. We were, too far up to be New York, so we're closer to Boston. So we kind of gravitate towards Boston. So I grew up going to house shows at Hartford Civic Center, and maybe there might have been 5,000 people there. So I mean, it's just a big difference when it's only 2 hours apart. In similar, well, not really a similar market. Hartford's not nearly as big as New York, but just to see the contrast of you going to MSG and then me going to Hartford, just 2 hours away, and they can't hardly draw a dime. But I still had fun either way.
Yeah, we romanticize about I think a lot of life has to do. I'm very aware of that. As my son is 7.5, I'm very aware that the next 4 or 5 years is like the heart of the stuff you romanticize about.
Yeah.
Of course, I have a little different life. I was like struggling to get in the upper deck and we try to find money to go to games once in a while. My son's like flying on the team plane and riding on it. Like it's a little bit, it's a little desensitized to the magnitude of it.
Yeah. Do you even follow the Curtain product now?
When I can, I try to. If I'm home on Mondays, I'll have it on.
Mm-hmm.
I remember. This is not a name drop so much as it is just a point. One of the last times JR was in Boston, we were still working there. I kind of lucked into a dinner where it was me, Jim Ross, and Pat Patterson, which is a master's level class. And and I grew up watching Pat too at the end of his career. And right at that time, that was right after Raw had gone to 3 hours. And given our attention span now, given everything, the difference to me between a 2-hour show and a 3-hour show is watching it versus putting on the first 15 minutes and then going back into your life and doing the things you have to do, knowing that social media or other things will bring you back if something significant is going on. You can see it on Paul Heyman's about to go to the okay. You can see it on Twitter if you want and get there. That's a big big attention span difference, and not like anybody had any choice. They had no choice but to do it. So we all understand the reasons.
Yeah.
But I'm aware. I'm not a hardcore, especially during the season.
Right. Exactly.
You forget it. We're invariably playing on Mondays. But you try to touch base. I think it's really cool. I was thinking about today with all the publicity about Ronda and Becky. You're aware Becky she's breaking through to where you're aware of what she's doing. You're seeking it out, which I guess is really the key now. I was thinking about Wendy Richter today because in this first ever women's main event, first ever whatever. Well, once upon a time, kids, back in 1984, Fabulous Moolah and Wendy Richter had a main event on MTV. It was like at the end of they put it on MTV. It drew a huge rating.
Yep.
And that was so it's not, of course this is groundbreaking and of course it's a big deal.
Yeah.
But I think about, always think about some of the people that came first, and that there has been a appetite for it. It's always kind of cool when the wrestling business or something that you love in your life kind of does something is sort of ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
And it was that way.
I haven't made any, well, let's just say I pretty much tell it like it is. I don't sugarcoat things on the podcast here. I take exception when Stephanie McMahon goes out on TV or tweets that, so-and-so is the first ever women's champion, disregarding everybody that came before her, like Moolah, like Wendy, Sherry, and hell, even Medusa, when she was Alundra Blaze, or this is the first ever women's tag team champions. Well, no, the Jumping Bomb Angels were the tag team champions. WWE seems to have revisionist history at one point or another.
It's always been that way. I mean, that's the way it was from the time, going back way beyond the years that, Ric Flair would walk in with the belt and he was a champion.
Yeah.
It's funny, doing Bellator for a couple of years, one of the things that I, no pun intended, wrestled with my new bosses and colleagues when I got there was this whole idea that obviously the UFC never mentioned Bellator. Well, the UFC was the number one group and we were the number two group. And I came right in right away and started making references. They were strategic, but I would make, if a guy had done well in the UFC but was struggling here in Bellator, we had a guy, Ben Henderson came over and he had been a big star in the UFC and he went all the time. He took some beatings in Bellator when you use it.
Yeah.
But just mentioning UFC, my new bosses and the people I worked with, some of them were like, and I said, you can't. He was a champion in another organization. That's regional wrestling stuff. That doesn't fly
right, yeah.
anymore. It doesn't work. Fans are too sophisticated, and it is. It does insult all the things that now that WWE owns everything. They own the history of the building, so they get to tell the history of the industry, so they get to tell it however they want. But it's always. I always like when the younger guys or the younger girls appreciate and know the history and the people that came before.
Like Sasha Banks and Bailey, they're students of the game. They grew up as fans. They're well aware of what came before them. But
of course, their history, like we're talking about the Jumping Bomb Angels, and they're like Lita and Trish to them.
Yeah, exactly.
That's who they grew up watching. And by the way, Lita and Trish,
who
they changed the game too.
They did, for sure.
I'm sure. You would know better than I. Didn't they have the first Raw main event?
They did.
First women's Raw. So
you're absolutely right. Yep.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a little bit hypocritical of the WWE that like to pat themselves on the back for having the first ever women's Royal Rumble, the first ever women's Money in the Bank match, and all that? They could have had this a long time ago. They're touting their victories now, but they're the same people that held them down for so many years. Do you think it's a little bit hypocritical?
I think anything they do to get the publicity they got Monday, that's the name of the game. That's their job.
Right.
Get it. I think that's not, that is for the, that's for people like you to do. That's for the people who cover the sport to just cover the industry to keep it honest. I've, for years, I always felt uneasy that Major League Baseball, not that they were celebrating Jackie Robinson, but they like to celebrate 1947 and the anniversary of it. And every year on that day that they would celebrate it, I would bring up the fact that 2 months before Jackie Robinson made his debut, Josh Gibson died. And he basically drank himself to death and lost his mind and went insane because he never got to play in the major leagues. And, okay, it's great that Jackie Robinson came 17 years before the Civil Rights Act, but it never should have happened. There shouldn't have been a 1947. There shouldn't have been a Negro Leagues for all the great players who played. This never should have happened. Yep. Yes, we're proudest when sports leads society rather than follows it, but let's celebrate the man and the accomplishment and not the anniversary of something that should have happened decades earlier.
That's a really great point. Man, you really are a student of just about everything, aren't you?
I can't sing or dance, man. This is all
That's all you do. That's all you're good at.
That's what I do. I got a son to raise. I need to sound like I have, reasonable thoughts on things once in a while. So you can say, oh yeah,
Right.
my dad wasn't a total loser.
That's hilarious. Do you have any plans of watching this year's WrestleMania or NXT? Or anything?
We play. It's funny. We often play. I mean, I'm certainly going to watch it. I'll watch it when I get home. I don't think. I want to say we play. Well, luckily, it's a 13-hour show. So
Exactly.
I'll be able to see some of it. I will. I think we have a 7:30. I don't have to look at the schedule, but I know we play that night. I've often. Yeah, I think it's more than once that's happened. I also used to do for years. I couldn't do it anymore because my schedule just got crazy. But I used to do the Frozen Four.
Right.
That often would fall around wrestling. There's always WrestleMania, the Frozen Four, trying to do all this extra work at the same time you're trying to do your fantasy draft. Like I'd never do well in my baseball league because it would be May or June by the time you were trying to dig out from all the stuff that had gone on. And if the Celtics ever went on a long playoff run, forget it. And you look down, it's like, how's my team in last place? And then you had the whole summer to try to fix it.
Do you subscribe to the WWE Network?
I do. I was one of the first people to do it.
Yeah.
And I met Stephanie not long after the launch. My now fiance, who as we talk is on CBS doing the Michigan game. As we met, she was doing an event. It was like the Many Powerful Women of Power, one of those things. Yeah. And Stephanie was on the panel with her. So afterwards, we're all talking, and I got to meet her. And as I was trying to explain to my now fiance like all these things about Steph and all the things that the company had done and how they had launched the network. Yeah. And she started talking about the network to Dana, to my fiance, and just turned to me and said, because this was the big gimmick at the time, she said, and how much does that cost, Sean? I said, $9.99, Steph.
I love it.
And it was like I'd never been more turned on in my life. It was like the greatest moment I've ever had. But I remember whenever the first day, I remember whenever that was in February because we were in Utah, but I remember certainly subscribing. And I love the old school, all the things that I thought was my personal responsibility to videotape on my new VHS machine that I got in 1983. It was my personal responsibility to record this stuff for posterity, and now it exists.
Now that's a cool thing, and that's a shitty thing because I still have about 17 or 18 totes in my garage that I've been carrying around for 30, 35 years, and my wife is begging me to get rid of this stuff.
Oh my gosh, that's the hardest part is dealing with spouses on that stuff. They'll never get it.
Like you don't understand.
I'm sure the videotapes have completely they're unraveled and they probably don't play and but we put all that work in.
Yeah, we did, and I've been carrying it around my whole life pretty much. I can't let it go. And I try to explain to her, but honey, it's got the original pre-show with Sean Mooney on it. Like you can't get that on the network, It's got all the old commercials and stuff on that, I just try to rationalize why I'm still keeping stuff around, but
don't give up until you have to.
Right. Yeah.
One day she'll be dead, and she'll go to your funeral, and then as soon as it's over, she'll throw the stuff down there with you, and that'll be yours forever.
I'm gonna put that in my will. You have to bury stuff.
You should.
That's a great idea.
I'll make a note to self.
I love it. Do you follow NXT at all?
I try. I've got a friend who does some work for them too, and I know I know the names. I wish that I could watch more of it. I remember when it first started, being able to watch a little bit of it. If I didn't have the job I had, and I had, what is it? I'm trying to remember what we used to call it before you had kids. Oh, free time.
Right. Yeah.
If I had personal time, leisure time, I think I would be one of those people that was probably more interested in NXT and watching I love the concept of it. Say whatever. I'm sure everyone has their own opinions of Triple H and whatever. He, recognized you can sit around and listen to every podcast with all the veterans, and I love listening to them all. It's fun, especially now because you go back to the Attitude Era, go back to the Territory Era. So much information available, and it's awesome to listen to.
Yeah.
But we know that the way it was in the old days was you learn the business by driving 500 miles to the next town after the show. I get it. Hunter's job, and I'll call him by his wrestling name because that's what we do. His job is to figure out what that is in 2019, and he did it with the Performance Center and with NXT. What else is there to do? There comes a point where the best modern wrestling example of the fact that you cannot can't do things the way they've always been done is when TNA tried to bring Hogan and Bischoff in on that one night. You can't go backwards. It's not about what's backwards. It's about what's next. And it's kind of why I'm kind of curious. And I told you Dave Lagon is a friend of mine, but I have kept an eye out on what they're doing with the NWA and online content and creating content for people so it's there when they want to see it. What's the next thing? The days of us, watching Georgia Championship Wrestling on TBS Saturday at 6:05, can romanticize about it. But that's not going to be the way it is. It's going to be done by putting a product the same way people have punched this up on their tablet where kids who are coming home from school can watch it and develop interest in whatever. That's the way it's going to happen. So whoever comes up with what's next is going to win.
Right. And I think Hunter has a fantastic mind for the business. We all know that. We've always known that. What I love about it is a completely different presentation from what Kevin Dunn and his team does on the main roster.
Yeah.
It's the matches it's even a different style. I mean, you can consider there's a WWE style and NXT tries to shy away from that, which is a little bit harder for them when they have to make that transition up to the main roster. It's presented a different way. It's a different wrestling style, but Hunter has his finger on the pulse of the modern wrestling fan, even us older wrestling fans, because a lot of those shows, like in NXT or the Full Sail Arena or Full Sail University they record at, it's a smaller building.
Yeah. It's
got a greater feel. It reminds me of the old days of like the NWA at Center Stage and things like that. It's a completely different product that I thoroughly enjoy every takeover that comes on. I think it's the best one. Some of the best events they put on all year.
If you're in the sports radio business, which I was in for a long time and happily escaped, but it was which was a daily grind. It's about men 25 to 54. It's about those narrow advertising things. What's interesting about my field, about play-by-play, is that you're presenting a game to 85-year-old women, 7-year-old boys. It's all over the map, and that's the same. WWE's audience is all over the map. So you should have an NXT, and you got to have enough for everybody. That's funny. Again, going back to Bellator, that's what I always thought Bellator should be a full service. We're going to have elite fights. Some of the best fighters in the world are still under contract for Bellator. But if you want to have the fun fights once in a while, do that. Develop a women's flyweight division. And have fun entrances and do some of the stuff that we did. In fact, everybody, whether or not you're an MMA fan or not, we tried to bring. We had a couple of opportunities to bring sort of wrestling feel to it, including when we signed Rory McDonald. People don't know this. The original plan, the night we signed Rory McDonald, is we had written this. I had pitched it and finally got it approved, but he hadn't signed his contract yet. He was signing it once he got to the building, so we weren't able to do it. We were already on the air with the show. We were going to do the whole open the show, first fighter starts to walk, and do the limo pulling up to the arena.
Nice.
And having what the heck is this or whatever, and Rory McDonald was going to jump out of the limo and walk into the building. We were going to, oh my God, Rory McDonald's here. Because is it hokey to some degree? Yep. Is it pro wrestling to some degree? Yep. Does it work? Absolutely. And people I think the biggest misconception is that even among the quote unquote smart fans or whatever, there's not, especially the hardcore smart fans, there's nothing we want more in the world than to mark out.
Yeah, exactly.
So
that's the whole point.
And that's why we romanticize about them. That's why we have all watched the Chris Jericho debut 100 times on YouTube. Because it's the moment that it's goosebump moment that gets you. That's what we always try to create. That's what we try as an announcer. Yeah, that's my job, is to make the moments, to do what announcers did for me when I was a kid, which is to make the great moments memorable.
Exactly right, and it's hard to get those kind of moments now with social media and the internet and spoilers and people doing the reporting saying so and so is signed with WWE. Like when Kurt Angle first showed up in TNA, I had no clue. Like they did a fantastic job of hiding him and keeping that secret, and stuff like that. I'll always remember when he showed up. The Hardy Boys got me when they returned to WWE a year or two ago. They were literally having like a tailgate party like a couple hours before that, and they said they had. I mean, they went to as far to the ends of the earth to try to protect the fact that they had re-signed. And when they showed up and that music hit, oh my God, that crowd went completely bonkers. And watching it back now on the network when they had their their 365 or not 365. Their 20, I think it's called WWE 24, where they had behind the scenes shots of that. They showed the crowd's reaction that you didn't normally see during the event, and watching people just jump up and down and hug their friends, and people were crying. Like I still get goosebumps just thinking about stuff like that.
I was lucky enough to be at one of the great. I'm a fan of crowd pops, right? What pops the crowd? What makes people react?
Right.
And one of the great ones in that Attitude Era, and of all time in the company, I happened to be there for, which was Mick winning the title from Rock, the famous Tony Schiavone thing. Which part of the people don't realize. If you're a hardcore fan, the reason Tony Schiavone did that is because it was taped the previous Tuesday night. Yeah. One of the reasons that made it the pop that it was, people forget, is that Steve Austin, they were taped on Tuesdays. Austin wasn't on the Monday show because he had been hurt. So fans were smart enough then to know if he's not on the Monday live show in Providence or whatever, he's obviously not going to be in Worcester the next night. Everybody knew he wouldn't be there, which is what added to that, which is why when the glass broke, watch that tape. People go absolutely, they lose their minds for it. Yeah. It was just one of these, great moments, and the moments resonate. And there are modern moments that resonate like that. And Dolph Ziggler, Money in the Bank,
for sure. Yep.
Okay, why does that happen? These aren't one-time accidents. There's things that lead up to it. Why are people invested in certain things, and can you get them? And is it harder now? I had Baron Corbin was on. He was doing some media tour, so I had him on during the Celtics game or whatever last year. Mm-hmm. And I remember asking him, how is it just much harder now to get to in this internet world and in the sports entertainment world where everybody just assumes everything is it harder? And he says, yeah, of course it is. It's harder you got to work harder to get people, invested, but it's worth it when you do.
I love Baron Corbin, by the way. I think he's a fantastic guy. And he's very misunderstood.
Smart dude, yeah.
So smart, loves the business. He's a freaking pure athlete. I mean, he's a Golden Glove champion. He's a great football player, and he's a decent wrestler. And he's finally starting to find his voice. He's put a lot of hard work into his character and trying to get over and cut more, better promos. But this whole getting stuck with Kurt Angle for Kurt's last match at WrestleMania hasn't really done him any favors at all.
Not his fault, yeah.
Yeah, not his fault, but I've never said anything bad about him. Obviously, because I'm a quote smart fan. I understand the man behind the character. But speaking of pops, going back to that, the two loudest pops I ever heard happened to be Stone Cold pops. I was at the In Your House Degeneration X show in Springfield when Stone Cold, I think he was facing somebody from the Nation of Domination. I don't remember who. But he drove his black pickup truck out, and as soon as that glass hit, I've never heard anything so loud. And Springfield's, you've been there, I'm sure. Springfield's small; it's a smaller building, so I mean the acoustics are great in that building. It was so loud. But WrestleMania 14, I was able to go to in Boston when he fought Shawn Michaels. Dude, man, when that glass breaks, the whole crowd pops, and you just get your hairs just stand up on the edge of your arms. I've never experienced anything like it. That dude was so over; it was ridiculous.
I flew back for that show. We had I was doing Boston College. This is the NCAA hockey tournament, and Boston College was playing in Albany. I remember doing the regional. It was like a regional final, and they go to the final. And I actually didn't take the bus back with the team because I wanted to fly back to get back faster. To go
nice.
to that, to go to that show that night. I will say, as an older person, there was nothing. The Hogan noise for the post show, the poses and stuff like that. And it just went on and on and on. It was a different time and a different world, whatever. But it's really hard to compare. But Austin was certainly the closest.
I thought Roddy Piper actually got bigger pops than Hulk Hogan when he came back in '89. He was.
I think it depends. Yeah, well, see, you're later I'm probably talking '84, '85.
Right.
In the early Hogan time was. Plus, it was a big deal to see him because I was raised in an era where the title was defended every month. That was the main event every month. And then it didn't take long right away before you realized Hogan was going to be a 4 times a year guy. Yeah. And that was the difference. It made it more valuable. Yeah,
and I was just talking to Jimmy Corderas about that. And Jimmy's a great dude. I don't know if you had a chance to ever talk to him.
I met him through Arda Ocal. I met him in Toronto a few years ago.
Yeah, he's a great dude. We had him on the show a couple weeks ago, and he talked about Hogan doing double shots and sometimes even triple shots. People ask, why does the main event go on? In the middle of the card. Well, Hogan had to leave to go to make another shot, and that's
That's
just
where
the
all
way
the money was. I remember
yeah.
the famous. Another famous match. It's funny if you list all the famous matches I've been to. It sounds like I've had an interesting life. It's that George Costanza. That's George Costanza. Like if you take everything I've done my entire life and you compress it into one day, it's not bad. A famous match I went to was the Savage DiBiase cage match at Madison Square Garden, where the fan jumps on the cage.
Yep.
That was a day that Hogan and Savage had worked in Philadelphia in the afternoon and like taken a helicopter up from Philadelphia to work the main event in New York that night. But that was the way of it in the mid-late 80s. It was all they were running 28 shows a month, and that's where the money was.
And you wonder why he's broken down now. I mean, sure, he didn't take a lot of bumps, but that dude has put a lot of miles on that body for sure.
Yeah. Phil, I was on a plane with Ted DiBiase in October, and I was like, no. I never want to meet. I never like meeting people because what if they're having a bad? I'd rather have my own. I had that was like my CM Punk thing. I was in catering because they were at a show at TD Garden years ago, whatever it was, and he literally sat down across the table from me to the point where this is awkward. There's this dude over here, and I'd heard things about him and whatever. Yeah. I'm like, I don't really want to, and I ended up just because he had done Bill Simmons' podcast, and Bill's a good friend of mine, and I introduced myself and. He was just he's just the greatest.
I heard that too. I heard he's very. There's a misconception about him that a lot of people have seen him in airports and he has his headphones on, doesn't want to be bothered. But you can understand that. Dude travels all the time. You travel all the time. You can understand that too.
I've seen it. I've seen it. I've seen stories. I have my own relationship, obviously, with Kevin Garnett, who I was with for 3 years in Minnesota and 6 years here. And
I love KJ.
Right. I mean, he is all that. But I know. I remember an incident where somebody I knew had taken their 8 or 9 year old nephew to the game. And as we're going to the airport, it was a getaway night for us, and we're in the car going to the airport, and I got a text from her going, "We're waiting out here for KG. All he wants is KG's autograph. We're waiting in the line." And I'm like, "Oh my God, this next text is not going to be good." And of course it was. That's SOB. He wouldn't even look at the kids, and because you knew that was was coming. Kevin's the greatest guy in the world, but he's not. You understand why you have to tune all this stuff out. And then every fan says, well, they should sit there and sign autographs for every kid. You can't sign autographs for every kid when it's a lot of this stuff. Our life is, hey, get in the van and get to the next town. The vans are very nice. Yeah. It's not a van and it's not the Ramada Inn. It's a good life, but it's, you got to get to the next thing.
Yeah, I agree. And not, sports teams are pretty much similar to wrestling or being in a band or any other thing. I mean, you're going to have stretches of time where you're on the road, you're on a 12-game road trip or whatever, and you're not home, and you're not always going to have a good day. And just I understand how if you come to my town, I may never see you again. This is my opportunity to say hi or get a picture or get an autograph. I can see the fans' point of view where, if somebody's having a bad day and they don't want to bother them, that's fine. But some people kind of take it to the nth degree and blow them up on Twitter and say this guy's an asshole and all that. But, they don't understand what, KG was going through that day. You know what I mean? He could have been tired. It's a long, grueling schedule, especially when you're playing 82 games a year plus playoffs. So
it's a different world now, social media and whatever, and these guys feeling like they're under for right or wrong. I'm not, there are times just to do it. And there are times not to do it, but it's a different world as far as being as public scrutiny, particularly NBA players.
They're known all over the world.
You can't hide.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, especially when you're Kevin.
I mean,
you're Kevin, you're 7 feet tall.
6'6". And have a familiar face that everybody knows. It's not the same as being. You can be Mookie Betts is one of the best baseball players in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
He can pretty much do what he wants. I mean, he can pretty much go where he wants to go if he chooses to, do it in a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Hockey players the same way. I mean,
absolutely.
Wearing helmets and football players, if you're a lineman, most people are probably going to know you are unless you're like Tyler Lewan or Taylor Lewan, guys like that. But yeah, I mean, being a basketball player, especially, I can't imagine what the hell did Jordan do when he was playing. He probably couldn't go anywhere. You know what I mean? Everybody across the world knew exactly who he was. Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, guys like that. Everyone knew who they were. I can't imagine what it's like to be in their shoes and not even be able to.
If you value your privacy at all,
it's
not a. pleasant life. I got to travel with Shaq for a year.
Mm-hmm.
He was with the Celtics, and you're a fascinating guy and very thoughtful. Whenever, but you realize, I remember I have vivid memories of like you're riding the elevator with Shaq. Imagine this, because imagine getting to see it from the other point of view when the elevator door opens, and people outside the elevator are standing there, and all of a sudden the elevator door opens and it's Shaq, and their eyes, just like I can close my eyes and visualize these moments, and you realize it's a blessing and a curse. You can't,
It is. That's why I feel bad for guys like Andre the Giant. Like that couldn't do anything. And besides the fact that he was oversized and he couldn't fit in a car, he couldn't fit in on most beds or in the showers. Like, besides being miserable because of that, he couldn't go anywhere without getting recognized.
These guys are flying, your Raws and wherever it is on Monday, and some of these aren't major cities, and they get to the airport Tuesday. It's the end of their weekend. They're trying to get home, and they probably have connecting flights because who knows where they are.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that's not in the brochure. You're a rock star on Monday night. Tuesday, you're a guy or a girl at the airport just trying to get home.
Right. Have you ever had any bad experiences meeting wrestlers at all that you can think of? If you don't want to sell anybody out.
No, it's not even that. I just don't. I don't have them. I've obviously some people know who my friends are in the business, and a lot of them have kind of have moved on. Obviously, Mick isn't in there much anymore, and obviously Jim Ross has moved to the next stage of his life. It's fascinating to me what an icon he is now. That literally anything happens in sports, somebody has dubbed one of his calls onto it, and it's cool to see. It's cool to see him get that attention and that love. I can't think of a bad experience I've had. I've been lucky enough to, like I said, be backstage is always far more interesting to me as a broadcaster, as a television person. When you see a weekend where there's a pay-per-view and a Raw and a SmackDown, I've been in the NBA a long time. That's the NBA Finals every night from a television production.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's truly impressive to see the entire organization that it is rolling from town to town. It's tough. No home games either, man.
Yeah, I know exactly. Not even MSG anymore. They hardly even cover. They hardly even go there anymore. If they do, it's for. Yeah, it is. Speaking of JR, I'm sure everyone thinks, at least in our generation, that he's the greatest ever, get in front of the mic. Have you listened to have you heard what his new project is that he's going to be doing for his new podcast?
Yeah. I'm for years now, to me, he has always looked to whatever the next thing is going to be.
Right.
He's always trying to do new things and different things. And, I think that's awesome. I've always felt, obviously selfishly and with my own view, and I think we've already talked about how good Michael is at his job.
Yeah.
I felt that trigger was pulled a little too soon.
Mm-hmm.
If you had to do it over again, I think the transition could have been better. I think that there were people in the company that never really understood the appeal because of that, the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
I'm as East Coast as there is, but
the
East Coast bias, not really understanding why he is so beloved.
Right.
It's a business that's found a business without stats, without a guy who's hitting home runs and whatever.
Yeah.
It's so subjective that leads to different jealousies and whatever. And all you have to do is listen to any of these Jim Cornette, Eric Bischoff.
Yeah.
I listen to all the Bruce Pritchard podcast to hear all the stories of that it's not always, kumbaya backstage and everybody's often has an issue with everybody else. I mean, all those are just, it's porn for a wrestling fan.
To
get that, all that back stuff, the stuff Conrad's doing is just, it's tremendous.
He's fantastic.
It fills a lot of, because listen, if you put the work in, so much of this is untapped.
Yeah.
And I think about the older guys, Harley Race and people like that, we're going to be losing to these people eventually.
Yeah.
There's all this stuff that isn't, all stories that haven't been told. Think of them that you want to get out there while there's still, a touch of you can still hang on to the history of it.
Yeah. And, it's funny, we almost lost King. I remember the night that he had the heart attack on Raw, I was on vacation in Panama City, and I had tweeted you, hey, did you just see what happened to the King? And you said, yeah, it's not good. That was a scary, scary thing.
It was. I think they came here very shortly thereafter. They had come to Boston, and it was still a very, very shaky thing. Talk about someone who's been involved in.
Whew. Yeah, I mean,
just at the heart of it was a million stories.
Yeah, seen it all, done it all, and I love his podcast. I don't know if you listen to it, but yeah, he has a really good podcast as well.
Podcasts are the new. I used to get depressed walking into bookstores because it would remind me of how many books there are in the world that I'll never get to read because who has the time?
Right.
Podcasts are the new. How do you know where to start? Your proverbial Netflix queue.
Yeah.
Podcasts will just go around the. Around the block. I
mean,
figured 10, 11 years, my son will go off to college. And I'm sure my eventual wife will have left me by then, and I'll finally have time to sit down with all the old VHS tapes that we've all saved that go through all the podcasts and catch up.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read a stat. There's something like 700,000 different podcasts now, and it's so hard to break into a particular genre. We're fortunate here to be an upstart, and we started a few months ago, but for whatever reason, people like what we're putting out, and we got picked up by a network that just launched. So, things are looking up for us, but it's really hard to break into the podcast business and try to get downloads. I mean, it's oversaturated, like 100%.
As I mentioned him earlier, but I've known, Bill Simmons has been a friend of mine for a very long time, and in addition to being, doing what he does well, more importantly, in some ways, he was the first. He was the first to be doing what he was doing. He was one of the first in the podcast world.
Yeah.
He was the first to do these kind of columns and whatever. And first one through the door, man. I mean, you can't take that away. It's what the WWE will always be the WWE.
Right. Yeah.
Of course,
that's true.
It wasn't. It was the WWF when I was a kid, so it won't always be that. But maybe it'll be something else one day. But you get the point that when you're brand X and you're the first one in, you can't beat that.
Yeah, no, that's true. People like to think Adam Carolla was the one that started all that, but you're right. Bill Simmons was the first. Not a lot of people know that. What do you think of the rumblings? I don't know how much you follow. What about Cody Rhodes' group and the Young Bucks coming up with AEW? A lot of internet buzz around those guys. Do you think with and I'm sure you know who their backers are, obviously. Do you think at some point they would be, I wouldn't say on the same level as WWE, but able to at least light a fire under their ass and maybe stoke a little bit of competition going again?
Well, that was everything, right? That's the whole. Yeah. That's what everybody romanticizes about with the Monday Night Wars, was just the idea that the other thing that's what drove both companies to go as hard as they did, was the competition. Right. I don't know. I think we can't, as I was saying earlier, you can't look back. Right. What's next? How are you going to present your product in a way that I'm not sure you can compete in a traditional way with them anymore. It doesn't mean you can't be successful at what you're doing. I just wonder if the days of somebody competing, having another Monday night show, going head to head with them, that's not the way it's going to be done. Mm-hmm. Is there a living to be made? I think there is. Yeah. I just wonder, if we were smart enough to figure out how it was going to be done, we probably wouldn't be sitting there talking about it. Podcasts, we'd be doing it, but it's going to have something to do with the internet. It's going to have something to do with content. And, how does that pay off? The problem is the traditional models are television to get people to come out to see your shows or sell pay-per-views. Yep. What's the different path to get there? What's the different path to be profitable or to be viable financially? Right. I think there are people, as I mentioned earlier, like what the NWA is doing and maybe what AEW is doing, they're making dents in the door, but I don't think anyone has broken through it yet. No, and obviously WWE is the number one game, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. It's it's like the Yankees, it's like the Red Sox, like the Lakers. I mean, everybody knows around the world who they are, regardless if they watch them or not. It's just they're just a household name. When you think of wrestling, most casual fans or most people that don't even watch it anymore know who the WWF or WWE was. So I do think they've noticed. I do think they're paying attention to what's going on, because they won't even let people in the arenas that wear AEW, merchandise and shirts and stuff like that. They know who they are. So you know somebody's watching. But any kind of competition will hopefully at least drive them to make a better product. Because I think they're complacent right now, because they know they are the number one game. So if they can get a decent TV contract, and you're right, present the product in a different way. TNA has tried, Ring of Honor has tried. They're both great products. In fact, Impact is doing some of the greatest stuff they've ever done recently. Unfortunately, their TV contract sucks, and no one's watching them.
But if AEW, I can't imagine Jericho signing there unless he knew what was going on. And he's even said as much, saying, "I'm not going. I wouldn't sign with these guys unless they had a decent TV contract and a great vision." He's too smart of a businessman, to just sign with them just to be a martyr.
It's interesting to me that the Monday Night Wars was what 5.5 years. It's been 18 years now that WWE has basically been the only game in town. I mean, time goes by. We're all older than we think we are, and time goes by faster. Time goes by faster than we think it does. But try to process that it's been over 3 times as long as the Monday Night Wars, that they've been not the only game in town, but it's been set up this way with the one, Vince wept for he saw all he had conquered,
Right. Yeah, that's good. That's a good point. It's not something you really think about. And you also have to remember that WCW was formerly, was bought from the Crockett's. So, I mean, it's the old NWA territory. They'd been around for 50, 60 years. So it wasn't like they were just an overnight thing as soon as Ted Turner bought them. They were fairly established in the South. Yeah. And even with TBS having, that's how I found it as a kid.
That was the time slot. That was everything. It was after my father tried to explain to me why Larry Zbyszko wanted to fight the announcer. It wasn't long before I discovered that there was that show on. It was funny because the NWA brought Austin Idol back to do some stuff with Nick Aldis earlier this year, and that was, to me, that was me marking out because that was the Larry Zbyszko Bruno thing led me to Bob Backlund and the WWF, but in Georgia there was Tommy Rich and Austin Idol and the Masked Superstar and now Mr. Wrestling 2, and that was just, you can't, at 9 years old, Saturday 6 to 8, lock it down.
You couldn't touch it, man. I mean, Rock and Roll Express and Ric Flair and the Horsemen. I mean,
the later incarnation, the '85 incarnation, and Jim Cornette, the Jim Cornette promo and the Ric Flair promo that were a staple of that show. That was like, and then you'd see like the Road Warriors. You'd see 2 guys out there who were like the guys on Star Wars that they would send that you knew were going to get killed. Every mission, it's the Road Warriors against these 2 guys you'd never heard of, and you knew it was not going to be pretty for the next 90 seconds.
Yeah, but, I agree.
Little tiny ring squash matches. That's what we grew up on. My father, one of the great memories of my father, and he died when I was 14. But when I, in those formative years, 9, 10 years old, I would stay with him. I was at his house on Monday nights. The Florida show was on one of the UHF stations Monday nights at 11.
Oh, wow.
I was probably like a 10:30 bedtime kid, but he let me stay up till midnight.
Nice.
Sorry, Mom. Yeah. He let me stay up till midnight you're going to find out eventually. I would stay up till midnight every Monday night because he let me watch the Florida show.
That was pretty awesome. Was that when Dusty was there and running all that? Man,
yep.
That's good stuff.
Kevin Sullivan, and this is flash forward, I just texted a buddy of mine who was a former WCW referee, Scott Dickinson.
Yep.
And he, Boston guy, and he right now, as we're talking, is at Safeco Field in Seattle with Kevin Sullivan watching the Red Sox opening night game in Seattle. So
what are the odds of that? Yeah, that's pretty cool.
It's funny how life works. So these are all the people I remember all the Kevin Sullivan. I remember the promos. I remember. It's funny what makes an impact on.
That's true. Let's talk a little bit of Boston sports. You being a New York guy, how hard was it to? I know it's your job, but was it a little hard to cover the Boston teams when you're a New York guy?
I think by the time you remember, I was in Minnesota. I came to Boston to go to school.
Yeah.
And it just became, BU. I went to BU, and those became your teams. And
right.
I think there comes a moment when you're in this business where the fandom, you go from fan to professional person of what you do. For me, it was like the Rangers winning the Stanley Cup was sort of the end of it was like the greatest moment of your life, and also the sort of sadness, like that's like the end of your childhood and the end of your fandom and whatever. It is kind of funny because not only did I hate the Celtics, I hated the Celtics. The player I hated the most for whatever reason was Kevin McHale, and my first job in the NBA was with the Timberwolves.
Was working for Kevin McHale. That's pretty surreal.
It's funny how it works. I always thought when I first came to the Celtics, I had this reverse brain thing when you'd be going to break doing the score at Madison Square Garden, that my mind would want to reverse the score because I had this sort of, this hometown thing with New York, and that was working at Madison Square Garden was a big deal for me, and being in the back where all those famous shots were, the guys coming to the ring or whatever the first time, in like the 99, first time I was back there, backstage and doing games there. It was pretty cool for me. But no, I mean, Boston's been my home for almost half my life now. So yeah.
I love
my
Boston.
My son's the one who's going to be confused because he's a Red Sox fan and a Mets fan because of me.
Right.
He's he's figuring out which teams not to like, which teams he trolls me by rooting for the Islanders because he knows I'm a Ranger fan. He trolls my fiance is a big University of Michigan person, so this is really sidetracked story about how kids become fans of certain things, but one of the most brilliantly devious moves ever. For his 6th birthday, my now fiance bought him a Tom Brady Michigan jersey, thinking this is brilliant. I mean, it was devious and brilliant. Make him become a Michigan fan. Well, because I went to BU, I'd taken my son to a lot of BU hockey games, and he became a fan of BU hockey. So in a horribly bad luck move for her, last year, Michigan beat BU in the NCAA hockey tournament. So he turned on Michigan.
Nice.
And now roots for Ohio State or Michigan State or whatever. He has little Ohio State pajamas now that he wears just to troll her. And based on what I'm looking at on the TV right now, he's going to be happy tomorrow morning. It's funny how you're early. That's what I said. Just like Bruno and Zabisco, your childhood stuff stays imprinted on you.
It does, and I hope to do it with my daughter. I have a 7-month-old, my first child, so I waited out as long as I could. My wife just wore me down. We've been together 20 years. She's like, dude, we're having a kid now, or it's now or never. It's like, I'm not getting any younger. I'm like, oh, shit, all right. And, I mean, obviously, it's the best thing I ever did. Of
course it is.
Changed my life completely. I never wanted kids. I always liked my freedom. I always liked to, come and go and all that. But, now that I have her, it's like, what the hell was I doing before her? You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't living life the way it should be lived, So everything now is pretty much centers around her. And obviously, it's so hard to balance your job and your family life and your other hobbies and activities. And I mean, I know for you, I'm sure you're busy all the time, but with me working full time, coming home, cooking dinner, to getting her ready, and then I go and do the podcast, or I'm also a Twitch gaming streamer, so I'm on there a couple nights a week, or I'm putting up content on YouTube. It's very hard to balance that and still try to keep your family happy. Yeah, but no, she's the best thing that ever happened to me, and hopefully I can indoctrinate her into being a Red Sox fan, and a Bruins fan, and all that. And so that's my number one goal is to make her a Boston sports fan. But at least you're a Mets fan. If you're a Yankees fan, we may not be getting along very well.
Well, and the funny thing was when I was 7. I spent the summer with my grandmother in Vermont. It's one of those things you look back now like, what the heck were my parents thinking about? But who cares? But the point was, in Vermont in 1970, in the late 70s, all you could get on TV was the Red Sox. So the Red Sox became my American. There's certainly in baseball, I don't care if there's an interleague play or not, there's a legitimate loophole where you are certainly allowed to have a team in the other league that's your other team.
Right.
And so the Red Sox always were my American League team. So even now being here and like you're always kind of root for the Red Sox, and I always had an affection for them, which now I'm going to have to do a Skype prop because it will be worth it, I promise you, which made for a conflict years later when I was in high school. There was a certain game I was able to go to.
Oh, man. Oh, wow. Yeah. God, that was so tough.
Greatest moment of my life. Everyone
obviously, yeah.
Well, it was for me. Everyone claims to have seen the thing on the Jumbotron, the Diamond Division, where it's a congratulations, Red Sox. I saw it because I was looking up at it, catatonic after the Dave Henderson home run. Yeah, thinking life was over and I'll never be happy again. And I just remember staring out at the screen, and then that thing flashed on the screen. You're like, oh my gosh! But I had Sunday season tickets. Like, I had a Sunday plan to go see the Mets, and that gave you the option to buy postseason tickets. So even though I was way up in the upper deck, I was there.
Wow, that's a tough
saw
game.
Mick Foley win the title in Worcester, and I saw the ball go through Bill Buckner's legs, and got to call Game 7 of the NBA Finals. So I guess life hasn't been a complete waste of time.
Yeah, no kidding. What a game to go to. Holy crap. Yeah, I was absolutely torn apart. I was 10 years old when it happened. So watching it on
I
TV.
think the point of that was the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So I've always
Right.
been, like, I was a Mets fan from a very young age, and it was a terrible time to be a Mets fan because they were terrible in the late 70s and the early 80s.
Wasn't a great fan to be a Red Sox either. So.
You're right, and the Yankees were winning, but it was the enemy.
Yeah.
The Red Sox were the
Yeah.
enemy of my enemy. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So how cool was it to call Red Sox games when you were able to do that for EI?
It was to this day. I mean, I've been very fortunate. I've had a lot of great professional experiences.
Right.
That was, and I think about it. It's opening day, so I think about it from time to time. It was very special to me. It was a thing that was probably years in the making, because when Dave O'Brien first came to the Red Sox, we had talked about it then as being a logical thing for me. And then a funny thing happened. The Celtics got Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett, and suddenly our season was going deep into June. And so it was halfway through the season, was half over. So finally that last year, 2013, was the year we were out by the end of April. And the opportunity was there to do, it was going to be like 10 games, and that became 15, and it became 20. And it was a dream for me. It was a dream come true. And it was something I was very conscious that there's a lot of guys who spent a lot of years in the minors and will never get that opportunity. So I was and I had a great experience with Joe Castiglione, I think he knew how much it meant to me and how much I love the game and how much calling baseball on the radio specifically.
Yes.
In my industry was important to me to do it well. And one of the, even literally today, you're sort of rueful about it, because one of the guys that was most supportive and pulled me aside to compliment me and which meant a lot to me, was Nick Cafardo, who we just lost. From the longtime writer for the Boston Globe, great baseball writer. Yeah. But it was it was a dream to do it. And then it's funny how this business is. So I go through this whole year, and it's like, this is going to be my summer job forever. It's amazing. Right. Down to San Francisco. We're doing a game. Played the Yankees before on Sunday night baseball. Flew all day to San Francisco to do the next night. Joe Castiglione had stayed behind to do. His wife had some medical tests or whatever. So I was going to start the game and set the defense and call the first inning. Red Sox Giants in San Francisco. It's John Lester and Tim Lincecum. I'm in my glory, right? I'm home in this game. I had a great night. The next day, I get a phone call saying, guess what? We couldn't work out a deal with the Celtics. You guys have been traded to the other radio station in town. And that was the end. And literally, that was the end of my baseball career, because we got traded to the other. It was me and Jose Iglesias that year got traded. Didn't get to do the World Series or any of the other stuff that came with it. But it was it was significant to me. Like the MMA thing was a complete extraordinary challenge. And in this world of Twitter and criticism or whatever, it was jumping head first into the sharks then for someone like me to do it. So it was very rewarding to do the show that we did and have that success. But the baseball thing that's because it was new to me. The baseball thing was something I felt always sort of born to do. Like, I'd been preparing for that since I was 5 or 6. So to do it and to do it well meant a lot to me.
So Joe Castiglione was a great guy to work with.
Oh, he was in that he just couldn't have been more helpful. I can't begin to describe how baseball is such a different world. Like you mentioned, my partner Cedric Maxwell, he would hang himself with his shoelaces if he had to be at the ballpark at 3 o'clock every day and work every day. The first time I was in that day game after a night game thing, I was like, you got to be kidding. This is for real. That's why Joe is like a marvel to me. You can do 162 games. John Sterling, say what you want about the content on the air of John Sterling doing he's 80 years old and he's doing this redefines grind. Right. And the first game, this is more of a broadcasting 101 thing. If anybody's probably punched this up, that might be part of it. I remember the early games, and Joe was introducing me to everybody, and we go down to the clubhouse, and you stand around and you talk to Mike Karp about where his kids are going to go to school, and Dustin Pedroia would want to talk to me about the Sacramento Kings, and there's this thing in the back of your head where there's clock ticking going, man, I got to get back to the booth. I got to do my job. I have the stuff to do. I have work to do. And then after a while of doing baseball, it clicks in and you realize that is the job.
Yeah.
The job is talking to Mike Karp about his kids and Dustin Pedroia about the Sacramento Kings, that it's a different day-to-day animal than in the NBA where you're playing a different team every night and it's a little more like prepare for the next game. But baseball is sort of one long day, and you're telling your stories and you're doing your work, and it's cumulative. It's all happening at the same time.
Yeah. How cool is David Ortiz to talk to? I've heard he's a great guy.
I didn't have time. Obviously, I wasn't around the team that much, but I enjoyed my interaction with him. I was there. I don't know if you remember a time he destroyed a phone at Camden Yards in Baltimore.
Yes.
That was my game.
Yeah.
That were my games that weekend.
Yeah.
I sort of remember having some fun with that. But that's another guy who you'll hear. You're somebody that big as a star. We find plenty of stories about David Ortiz blowing off a kid for an autograph or something like that because just by sheer volume.
Well, it's 162 games. I mean, Jesus, it's a long
my son
season.
had an opportunity. I was lucky enough to meet Pedro without Alex Cora in the dugout before a game last year, and I just couldn't. It just couldn't have been a more interesting guy to talk to. I love listening to him on the air, and we're talking about broadcasting and making that transition. And I take a picture with my son. He had just turned. He was probably he's 6.5 at the time. And he takes a picture, and how do you explain who Pedro is to him, right? And he takes a picture, and he knows it's somebody that played, and it's okay. He takes the picture, and he's like, okay, that's great. And they wheel in, the clubhouse guys wheel in this big giant thing of Gatorade into the dugout. And my son goes, Gatorade! And he kind of runs over there, and I just turn to Pedro. I'm like, isn't it nice that there's an age where people are far more interested in Gatorade than in talking to Pedro Martinez? Really cool dude. I enjoyed. I'm a big fan of Sam Kennedy, the president of the Red Sox. I'm a big fan of his.
Yeah.
And the organization couldn't have been any better that year I did, and it was a great experience.
That's awesome. I was born and raised a Red Sox fan. I was always a Yankee hater. My neighbors were Yankees fans, so we give each other crap all the time. But going to Fenway, man, there's nothing like it. I cherish my moments there. I got to go with my dad and actually go on the field during Father's Day and throw a ball around. Like, that's stuff you'll never, ever forget. We got to sit in the dugout. We got to walk the track and all that. Like, so many good memories of talking about baseball. That's the best thing I love about baseball. That's more usually of a father-son sport. It's just it's a national pastime, obviously. It's America's, pastime. But Fenway, man, just the smell of the popcorn and the sausages and just the old feel of that park. Even though the renovations they made to it have been fantastic, it still has that old-time feel. I mean, they've done a tremendous job with what they've done there. But being in Tennessee now, because my wife is from here, we end up moving down here to be closer to her family. I absolutely miss Boston. I try to go back every year, but I haven't been back in a few years. But it's one of my favorite cities on earth, and
I have a. That's funny. I could probably do this because it's behind me because it's all my screensavers and I have a big picture of my house. But last year I took my son to Wrigley. Whoa, might be looking out too low, but I don't know if you can see that.
Yep.
At all. But I had this picture of him and I sort of looking out, and that's a father and son, moment.
That's awesome.
Just taking to these ballparks, and he's become a baseball fan as much as a 7-year-old can be. And I'm coaching his little league team, and it's I'm sure he'll be into something else soon, but you got to appreciate each moment. Everybody will tell you because you have a new daughter. Everyone's going to tell you it goes by fast.
Yeah.
The first year does not go by fast.
Right.
Never sleeping.
Yeah. Right.
But it will start to go by, and as long as you're aware of that.
Yeah.
Like my son is he's like the greatest kid in the world, and I'm keenly aware I'm 4 or 5 years away from Dad. Can you drop me off 2 blocks from here because I don't want my friends to say.
Yeah, I know that's tough. Yeah,
I know it's coming, so I have my time now.
Yeah, Wrigley's cool. I haven't been there yet, and I'm probably like a 8-hour drive here, so that's one of my bucket list things to go to is Wrigley and Lambeau Field and some of the older stadiums and parks like that. But I'm pretty sure you've been to just about all of them.
Well, it's funny. When I was a kid, there was a point where at one point I'd been to like 20 or 21 of the 27, but then they all started changing, and then that number goes down.
Yeah.
There's new ball to the point where when I was a kid, my mother, give her all the credit in the world. We'd go on, she'd take me on baseball trips, and we'd go to all these parks, like in the mid 80s and whatever. But now all those parks are gone to the point where I realized the one in they're building, the Rangers are going to get a new stadium. I haven't even been to
the newer one.
Arlington Stadium
right.
when I was a kid, or whatever that ballpark was, but I haven't even been to so time goes, I went to the old Cincinnati one in St. Louis, Riverfront, but then they all go away pretty soon.
Yeah. I was able to go to the old Yankee Stadium at one time before they shut it down, and it was a dump back then. I mean, it was It's probably like mid to late '90s, and I mean, obviously being a Red Sox fan, I wasn't impressed anyway. But it was nice though to just say that I was able to go there, just with the history of the building. I'm a big history guy, so.
My father took me. I don't remember. I was too young to remember it. But when I was like 3 or something, I get to tell people that my first game that I was taken to when I was like 3 years old was a Yankee game at Shea Stadium. The final year before, it was like must have been '75 or whatever.
Yeah.
I get to at least tell people that.
Yeah.
I have a picture on my first Father's Day when my son was 7 or 8 months old. I have a picture of him and me at Citi Field. It's not Shea, but still pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. Well, I won't hold up you too much longer. I appreciate you coming on the show. There's so many more questions I'd ask you. Hopefully, we can do this again sometime when you're not as busy, when the Celtics season's over and all
in
that.
2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, yeah. Well, speaking of which, before we wrap it up, actually, how do you see them making a run here? I know they're the 5th seed, and people are kind of saying it's kind of they're not playing like a 5th seed right now.
Here's the short end of the podcast answer. They have been playing like a 5th seed all year. They've been disappointed. They've had a bad finish and a really ordinary start. They were very good in the middle of the year, and that indicates that they can be good again. And there is a window of opportunity in that. I don't think Toronto is completely solid. I think Philadelphia has issues, and they don't match up well with the Celtics. Indiana has played well without Oladipo, but in reality, I don't think they can beat the Celtics in a 7-game series without Oladipo. So it comes down to Milwaukee, and the Bucks are much better than people are giving them credit for, and they're saying the same things about them that they said about Golden State 5 years ago. They can't picture them winning because they haven't yet. They're really, really good. But I'll say what I've been saying on all the talk shows here or whatever. It's been a brutal year for the Celtics. The fans have, I don't want to say they've turned on them, but it's become, from unconditional love, it's gone to show me. We don't believe it until you show me. All that said, with everything they've been through and all the Kyrie craziness and all this underachievement and people texting me and tweeting me saying, I don't like watching this team. I've never disliked the team so much. Wow. If they beat Indiana in the first round, which I expect they will, if they go to Milwaukee, Kyrie goes full Kyrie, and they get one of those first 2 games in Milwaukee, everything will be forgiven when they come back here for Game 3. Yeah. And it'll be a brutal place to play for the Bucks, and everything will turn. I believe the Bucks are just. I'll say this: I think the Celtics get by Indiana, and the winner of the Celtics-Bucks series is going to the finals.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
So therefore, it seems absurd to talk about a 5th seed that's not going to win 50 games going to the finals. But if ever a 5th seed that didn't win 50 games has a chance to get there,
they have the talent to go on a run. They certainly do.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's hard on the road.
It really is.
That's why I really think they have to play. I think they can beat Indiana without home court, but I think this is important. Celtics play an important game tomorrow night. Puts them on the inside track to get. I think they need that home court in the first round that has to be a quick series.
Yeah.
They can't go 7 with Indiana and then expect to do anything.
I love Kyrie Irving. I think he's been a great addition to the team. I know people miss Isaiah, and I know he had a fantastic welcome back when he came back, was it last week or the week before? But people give Kyrie a bad rap. He's a fantastic player.
He's a great player. He's figuring out the other part of it, which is the leadership part. And, he's elite in the world. He is as elite an offensive player as there is in the world. He's had a borderline MVP caliber year in that he's defending, he's taking charges, he's done those things on the court. Off the court, he has not yet grown into the leader that you need to be in the NBA. He's trying earnestly. He's just not as good at that yet as he is at being an elite player.
Right. Do you think you'll ever see another Celtics team like you had with the Big Three in this day and age?
I think everything's going to be different. The best teams are the best teams. I mean, Golden State has had a Big Three. And look at it.
Sure.
Look at it now. Here's Golden State. They've done what virtually no team has done in the modern era, winning championships. They probably win again this year. And all that is stories that they don't like each other. Draymond Green and Kevin Durant. Durant's going to leave, and he's aloof. And, these are the best of the best. So what's it like to be on a 30-win team?
Yeah, which is hard to do, nowadays.
For all the things the Celtics have been through, how many teams would trade their roster and their sort of immediate future for the Celtics right now? 23, 24, 25 of the 29 other teams. How many would trade places? But, you've been out of the area for a while, even though you're still a fan. There becomes you get unbelievably spoiled.
Yeah.
When the Patriots win every year, and the Red Sox, who you thought would never ever win, have won 4 times.
Yeah.
And the Bruins win a Stanley Cup, and they get to the finals 2 years later. The Celtics are the team that's gone the longest without winning.
Right. Yeah.
Ponder that.
Yeah. That's true.
It's this brutal 11-year drought since they won a championship.
Yeah.
That's the longest in town. The Revolution won a championship, and
Yeah.
BU and BC Hockey won the national championship, and everybody wins here now. So what's this disappointing? What's 5th seed, 4th seed? This is an outrage. I can't. Sorry.
Yeah, I agree. And what a hell of a year that was when they won the championship. I'll never forget that season. That was such a good year, and just to beat the Lakers, man, like, it doesn't get any better than that. It just reminds me of the old school rivalry as I grew up as a kid with Lakers and Celtics, with Magic and Bird.
To get to that, was when I was talking about the Red Sox earlier and getting to do that. You realized right away you were part of something that's going to be. I can close my eyes and think about being on the bus going to Game 7. The story I always tell is Doris Burke is a good friend of mine, and in Game 7 in 2010, we're sitting next to each other. And she gets up, and the whole series, we were sitting next to each other in the games in LA. We're sort of kicking each other under the table like 12-year-olds. Like, do you believe where we are?
Yeah.
Like Jack Nicholson and Dustin Hoffman and Eddie Murphy, they're sitting behind us.
Right, yeah.
We have better seats than they do.
Right.
And she goes to interview Doc at the end of the first quarter, do that end of the quarter thing. And they hand out the stat sheets, and I had flipped it over, and I drew 2 circles on it and wrote something. And when she comes back, she sits down and she looks at her sheet, and it's got 2 circles. And one I had written the world, and I put a little dot in the middle, and I said us.
Yeah.
And you have to remember in that moment that you're doing Game 7 of the NBA Finals, and it's the Celtics and the Lakers. And one day there's going to be documentaries about this, and one day I'm going to be the old guy talking about calling the Celtics and Lakers in way back in 2008, 2010, when they meet again for the championship in 12 years from now, whenever it is again.
Yeah.
And people reminisce about 2008 and 2010.
Yep, and I was there when that happened. I was still back in Connecticut. I hadn't moved down here yet, and I still remember your call, and it will always stick in my mind. You're a fantastic. I'm not blowing smoke up your ass. You're a fantastic play-by-play announcer. You knew exactly what to say in that point in time, and even Max was the elation that Max had is what did it for me. He was like a little kid, you know what I mean? Like, it was just a magical moment that you guys were able to capture, and it'll stand the test of time.
I appreciate that, but it's funny because I'm a strong proponent of not, it's become very common for announcers to prepare their calls ahead of time. And I don't think you can do that. Had they won in Game 5, as I expected they would, one of the biggest surprises to me in my sports life was that the Celtics didn't win that 5th game. I couldn't believe they didn't win the 5th game in LA because, number one, it was a great storyline thing because it was Father's Day.
Yeah.
And we had 4 players on that team. Kevin Garnett, Leon Poe, maybe Paul, maybe Posey. I forget. We had 4 guys on the team who had become fathers that year, and Doc Rivers had lost his dad at the start of that year. And there was a poetry to it. It was Father's Day. And everyone knows you don't win that game to get on a plane to fly 3,000 miles to take a beating. That's why teams always magically lose that, like Orlando did the following year. That's why you lose that game at home. Yeah. And the Celtics had come back, and they had taken the lead, and it was all – I still couldn't – I mean, I wanted to jump on the floor and yell cut. Like when they lost I couldn't believe they had lost that game. But the funny thing so the call would have been completely different had it happened that night.
Yep.
But if you remember, Game 6 was over early in the second quarter. Yeah. So it was an hour and a half of this is going to be an inevitable thing. And I had written that was something I had prepared, not so much for that night, but I had written that on opening night about the monarchy and regaining the throne. I had written something for the website on opening night.
Yeah,
and decided to go that. But there's always a story attached to the mission statement, mission accomplished, which is what Celtic fans often ask me about.
Yeah,
it's funny how things pop in your head during in the comeback in Game 4. The next day, Tim Russert died because Tim Russert, the last conversation he had with Mike Barnacle was about, hey, did you see that game last night? Celtics comeback win.
Yeah,
that Sunday, the Sunday of Game 5. Meet the Press was just running the best of Tim Russert stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the best of Tim Russert things was him pressing his interview with Donald Rumsfeld when he kept pressing him on mission accomplished over and over again. Mission accomplished. That's why mission accomplished was my head. I wanted to do something for the people in the office about the banner 17 being the mission statement.
Yeah.
Mission accomplished was in my head because of Tim Russert and Meet the Press and Donald Rumsfeld, and it was just a snapshot of that.
Funny how a little thing like that.
That's how stuff like that happens.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. That's great. Well, that's a great note to end on. Where can we find you on social media, and anything you want to plug? I'll give you the floor.
I'm not a big plug kind of guy, but I'm on Twitter with my name with PBP at the end, which is not some people started. I have a couple friends of mine. One friend of mine is a wrestling fan who calls me the PBP kid, like HBK. It was like PBP is HBK. Kind of deal. But the thing I like most about Twitter is there are a lot of things not to like about it. But it's that I try very hard to respond to people when they have questions, as you know.
Yep.
Full well, I try very hard. It's harder the more people you have and the more, the first time I got on Twitter, my first night, I tried to sneak on because I didn't want to do it at all.
Right.
And Bill Simmons found out I was on. This is a true story. And he tweeted, "Oh, excited for Sean Grande. He's finally on Twitter, and he's an awesome play-by-play guy, and he's really funny, whatever," and tweeted that out.
Yeah.
I had just signed up for Twitter, so I hadn't turned off the thing yet where you get an email every time you get a new follower.
Yeah.
So Bill Simmons tweets this thing, and my phone was useless for 2 days because it's like 2,000 emails were like kept coming into my. I had to he literally took me out of communication for.
That's awesome.
2 days, but I use it for supplementing the radio broadcast with TV graphics and try to answer questions and get people to understand why the Celtics will clinch the tiebreaker if they win tomorrow. No, they don't. They play again. They really do. I've been doing this for a long time. You got to trust me. No, they don't. They play. Yes, they do.
Yeah, I know. Twitter is a whole different world. I mean, everybody thinks they know everything, and
until they meet you, and then when they meet you in person, oh man, or if you write back. That's the thing I found.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I'll write back and they'll be like, "Oh man, I appreciate you. I'm such a big fan of yours and whatever. Thanks for taking the time to write." I'm like,
okay. Yeah. And at least you're accessible. Not a lot of people are, and
I consider that if somebody grabs me on the street or grabs me at the gym or whatever, and they want to talk about the Celtics, it's kind of part of the job.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
I remember how we first got hooked up was. You were tweeting back and forth with JR, and JR had mentioned how smart you were about wrestling and how much wrestling knowledge that you had, and that intrigued me to answer that for whatever reason, and that's how you and I got kind of hooked up was through JR. But just funny how things work out, and now here we are 6-7 years later, and we're talking on a wrestling podcast. So it's a pretty cool thing for me, and I really appreciate you coming on. It's a big deal to me, just growing up. Wrestling fan, and then get to share something with you who's also a wrestling fan, but you're also a celebrity, and you're, you are. Come on,
try telling my son that.
Yeah, I know. You sell yourself short, but no, I do appreciate you taking time because I know you're such a busy guy, and it does mean a lot for me to come on. So hopefully we can do this again in the future, but it does mean a lot to me. So thank you very much for coming on our show.
My pleasure.
All right, guys, that does it for this. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We have more coming tomorrow. Tomorrow will be our flagship show, where we'll break down the go-home shows of Raw and SmackDown. We'll talk about all the news leading up to WrestleMania 35. We'll get into your questions in the mailbag. So until then, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and we will see you tomorrow for the flagship show. You have been listening to the Rad Turtles Wrestling Podcast right here on the Reality Check Podcast Network. Take care, guys. Thanks again for listening to the Rad Turtles Wrestling Podcast. Once again, you can follow us on Twitter. We are at RadTurtlesPod, and you can email the show, and we will read it on air. Our email address is radturtleswrestling@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate all of your support. You have been listening to the Rad Turtles Wrestling Podcast, only here on the Reality Check Podcast Network.